Now, Zandile Kumalo has once again detailed the soccer star's final moments, of course, For Meyiwa. Now, Kumalo says she tried keeping the late Bafana goalkeeper conscious by talking to him on their way to the hospital. eNCA reporter Manqoba Mchunu joins us now for more details on this. Thank you so much, Manqoba. Of course, you've been watching the proceedings in the High Court today. A very emotional Zandile Kumalo we saw earlier in court. But what else can you tell us? What came out of her testimony?
Well, certainly, Perrin, I think we all saw the raw emotions when Zandile Kumalo was giving testimony. Of course, she's one of the 6 people that were in the house on the day that For Meyiwa was shot and killed. And she detailed in court how they had taken For Meyiwa to hospital in that vehicle. She was seated with 2 of For Meyiwa's friends, Tumelo Madlala, as well as Mthokozisi Twala. And she detailed how she was, in fact, one of the people that had been putting pressure on the wound to ensure that Senzo doesn't bleed out. And she spoke about how she had touched his face on numerous occasions and how they'd spoken to For Meyiwa just to ensure that he was still awake at the time. And she gave a chilling, detail as far as, For Meyiwa's last moments and how For Meyiwa had become cold in the stomach at one point just before they reached the hospital. And it's only when they reached hospital that he was then admitted and taken into a stretcher into one of the rooms. And that's when, after a few moments later, her mother, Zandile Kumalo, who was also one of those who was inside the house, had then arrived with Longwe, who was her boyfriend at the time. And shortly after that, they then learned that For Meyiwa had in fact died from that. But she was quite emotional, Baron, during the testimony. At some point, the court had to stop for a 5-minute break to allow her to compose herself. But perhaps we can just take a listen to those details that she gave about the trip to hospital on that day.
Sathi sesemotweni kanjalo siloku sibeka ipressure esilondeni lapho, and then siloku sizama ukumkhulumisa ukuthi ahlale evula amehlo.
Whilst we were on our way, putting the pressure on the wound and also trying to speak to him so that he would keep his eyes open.
If you say to him, you're referring to the deceased.
You're moving it. You're referring to Senzo, yes.
Yes, we may proceed.
Makusenjalo ngabona ukuthi lokhu kweqamehlo ubheka phezulu.
Whilst at that, I noticed that he was sort of like in open, his eyes wide open and looking up.
Yes, you may proceed.
Kaloku ngiqhubeka ngimthinta ebusweni ngithi Senzo hlala nathi ungayindawo. Sesiyafika esibedlela.
I kept on touching him on his face and saying, Senzo, remain with us or stay with us. We are about to arrive at the hospital. Stay with us and don't go anywhere. We are about to get to the hospital.
Yes.
And then ithema kusenjalo ngamphakamisa iskipa ngambamba la ngaphansi esiswini. Ngamuzwa ukuthi i-temperature njengoba bengimthinta ebusweni ayisafani nalengizwa esiswini usiyabanda esiswini.
I then lifted up his t-shirt and touched him on his stomach, and then felt that the temperature is no longer the same as when I touched him in his face. He was now cold on his stomach.
Now, of course, Manqoba, Zandile also went into detail about the accused, especially accused number 2, pointing him out in court. What did she have to say on this?
Well, indeed, Baron. In fact, she had gone into detail about the identikit that they had to compose following the shooting that had happened on the 26th of October in 2014. When police were investigating this particular matter, they had been called to do an identikit by the police. And this is a drawing that is done usually to try and provide, an indication of what the suspects look like. She says that what she saw on that day, and according to the information that she had given to the police that had been taken this identikit rather, was just the details of the facial details of these suspects. One of those suspects, she says she saw the first suspect that went into the house was short in stature. He was, had dreadlocks, and his dreadlocks were up to the shoulders. And he also gave details that this particular individual also was light in complexion. He had a shiny skin, and also he had contours on his face, and those are some of the features that enabled her to then make that identikit. And she also made mention of the second suspect in particular, who she says was tall, and this was a suspect who was dark in complexion and had a pointed beard. And when she was asked later on during that evidence in chief, she also admitted to the fact that in fact she could identify one of those suspects in court. It was accused number 2. She was asked how could she identify that it was in fact Bongani Ntanzi that was in the house, and her response was that from what she saw on that day, this is one of the accused that she is quite certain that was in the house on that day, due to the fact that he's tall and also just at his complexion. She says she was able to make out that it was in fact Bongani Ntanzi that was in court not in the house rather on that particular day, and of course saying that she's quite certain that it was him. It's not the first time that we're hearing the name of Bongani Ntanzi being mentioned in court. I think in the previous trial that name was also mentioned by one of the witnesses that had taken the stand, in the form of Tumelo Madlala, who was the friend of For Meyiwa. But we know better, and of course, that those proceedings have now been nullified, and therefore they'll have no particular impact or bearing on this particular case or this trial that has now started de novo. But certainly Zandile Kumalo identifying Bongani Ntanzi, who's accused number 2, as the second intruder that had come into the house that was behind the first accused, who she had earlier indicated was the one that had a firearm, that had demanded that they give him cell phones as well as money. So that is what has come off from the testimony of Zandile Kumalo. Of course, the cross-examination is expected to resume. She has wrapped up her evidence in chief here in court, and after lunch we are then expecting that perhaps cross-examination is likely to continue.
And, let's talk about, Judge Rata Mokgatleng. It seems like, there's a lot of belief that he is the right guy for this case. And it seems he doesn't waste any time. So would you say this is exactly the kind of person we need on this case right now? And so far, so good from his side?
Well, certainly, Baron, given the delays that had marred this particular case, you recall that we had 5 witnesses in the previous trial, and of course there were also issues around just the time that this particular matter was taken. I know that the For Meyiwa family had indicated that they really wanted finality as far as this case is concerned. So really what they were looking for is to see this particular matter going forward, and to see the case itself, the trial itself continuing. And I think they are quite relieved at the fact that it seems like the proceedings are continuing, and that there are likely to be less delays this time around. So the fact that Judge Rata Mokgatleng was appointed, and this remember was one of the judges that had retired at the time, so this gives him ample time to actually deal with this particular matter. We know that he has no other cases that he's currently dealing with. He's been brought in specifically to deal with this particular matter, and also given on just the experience of Judge Ratam Khweteng. He's presided over other high-profile cases, and therefore the hope is that perhaps this is the judge that will bring this matter to finality. I know that certainly from the Senzo Meyiwa family, this is what they're looking for, to finally find the answers as to what really happened on the 26th of October, and they'll be looking to this very court and perhaps this judge as the one who finally brings this matter to finality, Perrin. So at this particular point, it does look quite set that this matter is going to continue. And in fact, just on that issue of the proceedings and the demeanor of the judge himself, I mean, he had indicated that there won't be any tea break that will be taking place today. So that just tells you of his seriousness as well of concluding this particular case, which of course has dragged on for quite a number of years.
Thank you so much, Manqoba Mchunu at the Pretoria High Court. Of course, the Senzo Meyiwa murder trial taking place. It's day 2 today of that particular trial. We heard from Zandile Kumalo, who was in the house the night Senzo was killed, 26 October 2014.